The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, my name is Jolene Schaefer and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for SWK Technologies. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, You're Not Immune, Understanding and Reducing the Cybersecurity Risks in Your Sage 100 Environment, presented by BJ O'Reilly, Chief Technology Officer of SWK Technologies. A little housekeeping before we get started. Everyone has been placed on mute to keep the background noise down. However, you can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar. To submit a question, look for the questions section in your GoToWebinar. We will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. We are recording this presentation and it will be distributed tomorrow to all attendees as well as to those who registered but were not able to attend. Please take a moment during the presentation to answer our one poll question. And just a reminder, we will be hosting 2 giveaways for this webinar. By registering and attending, you are automatically entered into a raffle for a $50 Amazon e-gift card. And by attending and requesting follow-up information or a network vulnerability test during our poll question, you will be entered into a raffle for a free network assessment valued at $500. Winners will be drawn and notified after the presentation. With that said, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to attend our webinar. We're here to help you get the most out of your software solutions and help you find an easier way to run your business by providing you software and industry knowledge, tools, and support whenever you need it. So whether you're here doing research for a new solution or you're just here to learn, we'd like to encourage you to ask any questions throughout the webinar. Lastly, as a quick reminder, SWK is constantly sharing important updates and software tips and tricks on our social media channels. So we encourage you to follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Without further ado, I'll introduce BJ.
Thank you, Jolene. I appreciate that. And welcome everybody to You're Not Immune, Understanding and Reducing the Cybersecurity Risks in Your Sage 100 Environment. A little bit about me. I am the Chief Technology Officer at SWK, running our Managed Cloud Services practice, our hosting practices, our security practices. I have about 25 plus years in the IT services world. I also have that same amount of time in the Sage 100 world. So definitely coming at it from a technology approach on both sides for you. Contact information is up. You're welcome to reach out at any time. So we're going to cover on our agenda today, we're going to cover a little bit about SWK. We're going to talk about threats, targeted versus opportunistic attacks. We're going to talk about the work from home world and how that's increasing vulnerabilities, especially in the Sage 100 world. We're going to talk a little bit about securing your environment, so designing around those workforce environments. Talk a little bit about this terminology, endpoint protection, and also talk about on-premise versus hosted. We're going to talk about hosted applications, contingency planning. I'm going to talk a little bit about a customer hacking testimonial, and we're going to also talk about what we offer in our managed cloud services practice. A little bit of Q&A at the end. So a little bit about our corporate organization. So SilverSun Technologies, our publicly traded parent on NASDAQ, is SSNT. Is the holder of 3 main technology companies under SilverSun. SWK Technologies, which all of you are familiar with, working with us both on the ERP side, our managed network services, warehouse and other automation pieces. Our secure cloud services, which is our business application cloud hosting. And then we also have a cybersecurity as a service company, CCDC, that is out there constantly on our security operations center, monitoring a vast majority of customers for us. It's a little bit of company overview. We do cybersecurity, hosting, managed cloud, managed services, IT help desk, ERP, accounting software, and I'm going to take a deep breath, software automation and HCM. So we do quite a few things at SWK. A lot of diverse practices have come together that actually work in collective. So we've got a large team nationwide, over 170 professionals and growing even in the midst of COVID, over 6,000 customers, and we provide coverage all the way from the Pacific time zone all the way to the Eastern time zone across multiple customers. We've also won several awards and MSP wards, and have continued to see those partnerships grow across the board, including our Sage partnership, our Acumatica partnership, and our MSP partnership as well. So let's talk about the differences. There's opportunistic versus targeted threats. And a lot of us live in this world where we really think that, hackers are out there, they're going after people, and they're wanting to, to go after businesses. And I hear this a lot, especially in our customer base, where I'm not really a threat to anybody. What would they go after in my organization? And a targeted threat is usually a typical attacker. They're selecting and engaging in a specific target with a specific objective. A lot of times you will see that to be government institutions, you'll see that to be school districts, things that have a high vulnerability, but also have a high target metric for them. They understand that they're dealing with millions and millions of dollars. On the other hand, for a vast majority of our customers, they're more opportunistic on that side as far as attacking. So they take advantage of a vulnerable target and it's unidentified. So most times these hackers, they don't know who you are. They just know that you clicked on the right thing at the right time and activated something that is allowing them to come in and assess or go after a financial gain with you. So and targeted attacks are definitely more dangerous. For several reasons. Attackers are generally willing to spend significant extra effort to compromise their target, so they're looking for every possible way in, and they're definitely looking for a financial gain. It's definitely something they're after. They know if they can get in, they're either going to get specific information they can sell for that financial gain, or they're going to get specific ability to ransomware or hold your information hostage as well. So it's not the most common for our Sage 100 customers based on our experience, and the information from our security operations center is that we're not seeing that as the typical piece. They're not targeting you. More so what we see is the opportunistic attacks coming from vulnerabilities and resulting in perimeter attacks. So usually phishing email, internet browsing and downloads, and as I like to call it, the install of the unknown software tool from the internet. So we all think if it's the internet, it must be true, and opportunistic attackers are looking for that case. So let's talk about work from home. So we entered this whole world of COVID-19. We all had to really diversify our workforce and begin to work from home. A lot of larger organizations already had some infrastructure in place to be able to do that. But our smaller customers came back and said, hey, we need to be able to do this. So, I'm going to have Joe use his computer at home that his kids play games on to access my integral network. And not knowing that potentially could have some flaws in it or some issues. So one of the things that we started going back is really educating on web security protection, understanding that you should have a work from home policy. So you definitely making sure that if you're using a general PC that is, a personal piece of equipment, what's the policy there to make sure that, somebody's not downloading something that's going to allow that potential opportunistic attack. And then you should be offering the right tools: VPN, encryption, password management, firewall protection, assessing that PC meets the requirements of the organization to be able to use effectively and not cause some other issues. And then talking about training and best practices. So the better part of this, I say to everybody, is you understand your home network, where those potential vulnerabilities are. So for example, having your wireless password being named after your dog that you yell at as it goes out the door is probably not the best security measure. So I always tell people adding numeric, adding ancillary characters to something still allows it to be a lot less vulnerable than just using a straight name or a straight open access. So let's talk about the new work paradigm. So changes are occurring in 2020. And if I could see all in a mass hands, we'd all want to agree probably that we'd like to skip over 2020 and never repeat it ever again. So for sure, you know, COVID-19 employers have mobilized a mass work from home paradigm. So companies like Zoom, they grew, Microsoft Teams, all of those type of companies grew in a very fast order. And so everybody was working to use these different tool sets to be able to deploy. So we created this new work paradigm, you know, and we had to move very rapidly. So some companies like SWK already had, you know, that remote working model and culture, but we also found ourselves having to expand that quickly. In the case of SWK, we had to expand our finance team to work remotely. That meant we had to incur document management, the handling of information between the different employees, all of that had to come into play. So, you know, whether you had a work from home paradigm or you had something in place, it all required us to do some strategic rethinking on how we were going to approach that. So companies with physical locations and on-site services shut down. So we tried to deliver new products and services while being highly secure, right? So Zoom out of the gate, you know, had some holes that were quickly discovered. And so we began to react to those changes, and we were unknowingly taking risks. We had to jump into that world. So remote working computers access to applications data that are not only critical aspects of your business continuity, but crucial to everyday business. We had to adapt those very quickly into this new work paradigm. So, and that put a level of cyber threat and cybersecurity onto the primary business applications that you use. So let's talk about how to secure your environment. So I will tell you the number one cybersecurity threat that you deal with every day, whether you're an IT professional or an IT company, is employees. They're your number one cybersecurity threat. And part of that is because of how we exchange information. And a lot of you in the IT world would know that, you know, you try to enforce a strict policy, but let's face it, in the world of accounting, sometimes we have a little bit of a harder time getting people to understand that, you know, while you may not think your ERP package is a threat, you know, I do think it's a threat. So things like sharing of user codes and passwords for the network without an encryption or protection. Commonly, I will say, you know, our help desk will go, can I get a user code? And they'll email it when they could have quickly given it to them over the phone. That's not probably the smartest maneuver, as you know, opportunistic threats and targeted threats are looking for those openings where they can. So, and while you may say it's protected, it's behind a firewall, my Sage 100 is on, you know, has security, it has all of these things. Again, that opportunistic attack can happen in any way. So if a user is willing to share that type of user code and password, they could be willing to share their own user network access password as well. So then internet browsing on computers with full unrestricted access to Sage 100. And I'll be the first to say, you know, in my 25 years of Sage 100, it is not the most secure application in the sense of a network architecture. So it requires a lot of full access to the Sage 100 directory in order for the application to exist correctly. And in those cases, if your user has that unrestricted access in some way, the vulnerability exists to get from that user into that Sage 100 directory. So email of information related to Sage 100 locations, I'll talk about later about a breach that actually occurred because the attacker knew the strategic location IP address of a server containing their Sage 100, and they attempted an attack and a breach on that directly. So definitely keeping that information as secure as possible is also important. So checking URL information in emails, that seems to be a common one. We click it on. Not checking to make sure that the sender that you sent it is actually the person. We had that phishing around our company where it looked like our CEO had sent requests out to users and it really wasn't the CEO because they didn't double check that the user behind the scenes was really, they were masking themselves to look like they were that user. So, and here's the big one. And this is one that we commonly deal with in our world, is that we want to turn off antivirus because we believe our Sage 100 is running too slow. So we turn it off completely versus allowing it to function by setting guidance and rules. And so you'll find that we have spent a considerable amount of time educating our consulting teams about how antivirus should be configured so that it doesn't leave the company in a vulnerable state. So let's talk about designing a distributed workforce environment. So I'm always a fan of standardizing your technology. More commonly, people will say, BJ, you know, what works well with Sage 100? Do you find that there's one antivirus over another? And I would say to them that it's not a matter of whether there's one antivirus over another. It's a matter of how many different antiviruses do you have in your environment, and there's no standardization of that technology. So having a single technology allows us to you know, to quickly adapt that technology to a known application's idiosyncrasies, in this case, Sage 100. So in our case, we use in our hosting environment a single antivirus application that we know has been configured and designed and can be rapidly deployed to a new user that has the same configuration that works for another employee. So we have that standardization. So meeting weekly with your workforce. So knowing that you have these little things that go on and making sure, you know, hey, last week I accidentally clicked on something. Should I be worried about that? You know, making sure you talk with them on it. I am a big fan of using some kind of project tracking software in that distributed workforce environment, just because it allows that workforce to see when things are being completed. It definitely makes and helps for them to see things in play related to projects going on that may not specifically have a level of communication on a weekly basis. So, you know, and that can be very simple, anything like a base camp to as sophisticated as maybe a smart sheets. So organize and centralize your communications through software platforms, you know, and that's another one where, you know, I like Outlook, or I like Google, you know, Google Mail, or I like this, or I like that. You know, find a way to centralize those communication platforms, because the vulnerabilities that exist in a single platform, case in point, when everybody moved to Zoom, you know, once you're aware of the vulnerability, you can definitely react or communicate that vulnerability back to your workforce. If you're using multiple different products, you may not be aware, because you're not in the know on that product on a day-to-day basis, on where that product vulnerability might exist. And I would tell you, our team, our security operations team, are constantly reviewing vulnerabilities of multitudes of applications, because we definitely want to make sure we're looking for that to secure it. Then maintain personal accountability. You know, somebody said, well, I'm sorry that my 4-year-old daughter downloaded a game onto my personal laptop. There should be some level of accountability related to that distributed workforce's use of especially company-based laptops or computers. Moderate and control workflows. So that's probably one of the biggest pieces. And when we added this in, that was one of the biggest issues at SWK, is how can we moderate and control workflows related to a workforce working from home. And everybody had a certain way of doing it, and it very, very quickly became apparent their workflows all adapted and changed to their environment. So anywhere that you can moderate and control that makes a difference. And that goes back to my point of using project tracking software, because you get an idea and understanding to be able to communicate that back to the team. So, and then find a way to get feedback. So what works, what doesn't. We were constantly asking every day, what's working for you, what's not working. Our employees quickly were really good to share with us what wasn't working. We also want to know what was working, so we can adapt that and bring that to the rest of the workforce. So let's talk about the very important part of this, and that is, you know, how to secure your environment. So I talked about, you know, my 25 years of IT experience. That also goes into Sage 100, back even when it was called Mass 90. And for the most part, for a lot of you, if you've been around in the Sage 100 world, it hasn't changed dramatically. It has led a very same or similar life, and much to the frustration to a lot of IT professionals. And so as Sage began to develop, it really became apparent that they had to comply with some certain components related to things like passwords. So I'm a big fan of passwords being at least 8 characters, if not more. In our in our network environment, 12 is the standard for us, but 8 should at least be the minimum. I won't tell you how many times that I found that the password for most of our Sage 100 users was password. So definitely need to change that and make it much more encrypted. And if you're not familiar, Sage 100 Consultant or our help desk can help you with that. There's a section inside of Sage 100 where you can set password links and definitely some security. And I'm a big fan of password changes. So the fact that Susan's password has been password for the last 3 years, and we've had 16 people leave the company who all know that Susan's password is password, is usually a big problem. So having a regular password change cycle, even in the world of Sage 100, makes a big difference. The breach of information, let alone the ransomware that might happen, are 2 things you definitely don't want to have happen. So even making sure that the application itself is secure is definitely important. And this is the bigger one too. We see this quite often when you disable users when they leave the company. And we see this a lot in our hosting environment when we would say, hey, let us know immediately when you're going to let a user go. And not doing so means that you're open to having them have access into the outside world. So you definitely want to make sure that that happens across the board. So having a process and policy, especially with Sage 100, and I'll say this, we had an event occur in that case where we had a company not do that, and the user gained access through an RDP connection directly into their system. And he used the infamous delete *** and completely wiped out their mass 90 directory. So those are things you definitely want to make sure you take and disable. So again, within the Sage 100 world, you stop that ability to get into that. So, and then I recommend a directory structure review with your MSP or your IT provider or your internal IT folks. We can definitely lock down core components in Sage 100 in that directory structure to give it a much more secure environment. And by default, the easiest way to do is to give it complete read-write and directory listing access to that, because that's what Sage 100 requires for the vast majority of its system. But there are other areas that you can secure it, and so we're definitely willing to work with you. I wish I could cover all of those in this seminar, but you're welcome to reach out to any of us and talk about what that looks like. And we'll also do some follow-up as far as this webinar. So the other thing is making sure you have regular updates. We have more times than not a lot of people running older operating systems. They're not keeping their servers and their workstations up to date. That's definitely a vulnerability opportunity in itself. And then I'm always going to say this: you can't replace a good antivirus software. You definitely want to have that. So one of the pieces I've found, so as we were talking about Sage 100, and this is an exploration of experience, not just test and trial, was one of the bigger pieces in securing an application like Sage 100 was this understanding that there is only so much you can do at the network level as far as the privileges required to run the application. The other thing you'll find with Sage 100 is it's an intensely I/O intensive, input-output intensive product, and therefore can cause other things like antivirus to think it's behaving in a certain way. And because of that, what we found in our experience as we started to see the emergence of this endpoint protection community is that was really a huge asset to the Sage 100 world, because it prevent it and could learn through advanced machine learning and understanding of how the application itself performed. So endpoint security is the practice. It's safeguarding that workflow and that individual device connected to the network. So it becomes less worried about how the people behave and more so about what behavior it might see from that workstation. And so endpoint became smarter and used machine learning to do that. So it was able to detect, threats in near real time. It was more so advanced anti-malware. So it doesn't replace antivirus, but what it does is it protects and detects that malware and prevents it from moving between your environment. And then it's proactive in web security. So I talked about, those individual employees downloading something accidentally. Endpoint protection can secure that so things like that can't execute. The worry for you is not so much whether you have a vulnerability in Sage 100 as much as that you can execute something that may go after a Sage 100 application or directory. So it ensures that. It also looks at data loss, and filtration. It's got integrated firewall to block network attacks to prevent one station from moving to another. That gateway of looking at email and information before it enters the network. And the bigger part of it is this threat forensics, the ability for us to isolate that and remediate is the terminology we like to use, that threat, and remove it so that it doesn't further impede the system. So, and its endpoint is not just a product. So a lot of people will tell me, well, I can buy endpoint protection and I can put it on, but our security operations center is also managing that endpoint protection. So there's that visibility to operation. And so what do you do if it detects something? Do you know how to react to it? Do you know what to do? So definitely looking at that from that perspective is to allow the opportunity for that remediation to occur to remove that potential threat before it gets any farther. So it involves, like I said, email and disk encryption are part of that. So it's encrypting information so that there's a secondary layer there. So again, it's not the catch-all of everything, but it does reduce your threat against Sage 100 dramatically because it really doesn't care how Sage 100 operates. It learns how it functions and how it works within the confines of the network, and considerably different than antivirus. So let's talk about, we talked a little bit about endpoint protection. I get this question all the time. I'm trying to decide, BJ, do we stay on-prem? Do we go host it? There's a multitude of questions related to that. And I thought it was important that we cover kind of the understanding of what those type of things are versus which way should I go. So, obviously an on-premise with this type of implementation, you're responsible for everything, right? So you either have an IT company, you have an MSP, or you have a full-time IT person on staff. But you're responsible for the power, the servers, the operating systems, the database, the backup. You need to maintain all of that to keep it running and safe and up to date. And in some cases, an on-premise situation works well within the confines of the organization. If you're safeguarding information in that on-premise and you want to feel comfortable that you yourself are controlling that, then that's fantastic. It works well for you. In the vast majority of the customers, especially the smaller customers, and I like to call them the phone room customers because their servers are stuck in a phone room somewhere, and you open the room and it hasn't been dusted for 3 weeks, and that server itself hasn't been checked, and there's 4 blinking lights on the drives because there's an impending drive failure. That type of customer might want to think about a hosted world. So you purchase the licenses, you own your Sage 100, it's completely yours, you own your data, but what you're purchasing from that hosted provider is hardware, software, and infrastructure. So basically, if you're like from SWK, MCS, or our secure cloud services, you're going to be renting that infrastructure. So we're providing the power, the hardware, the backup, the software, the hard drives, the encryption, and in some cases, endpoint protection, cybersecurity, antivirus, all of that is there so that your environment, all you're bringing to it is your Sage 100. So, the consideration there is really for you is a matter of how comfortable you feel with your on-premise solution, And we also have a lot of people who are doing a slight hybrid, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But those are the two differences between them, and decisions on that side are a matter of how much of it do you want to manage and how much of it do you want somebody else to manage. So securely hosted applications, we do Sage 100. You can host third-party applications, so Alltech, CRM. You might have shipping solutions. And in most cases, hosted applications or a hosting provider for you should supply cybersecurity, endpoint protection, antivirus, Windows licenses, all of the infrastructure for you to feel secure that your software is as safe as possible. Nobody can guarantee that your 99.99999% or 100% would be the real term there. What they can do is give all of the tools so that in the advent of something happening, that they have business continuity to get you back to where you need to be. So in the course of action in Sage 100, again, it's asked of me. So I always ask this question: how long, if you were to be attacked and your Sage 100 system was down, how long could you be without it? Could it be, is it 1 hour? Is it a day? Is it 2 weeks? Is it 6 weeks? Whatever that is. And the vast majority will say, well, I can't live without it at all. So in that case, you should be doing business contingency planning. So your organization needs to understand, in the unexpected event or situation occurs, if you have, a natural disaster. And by the way, I'm in the Pacific Northwest, sitting in Oregon. And for those of you probably know, we've been, in a fire attack of unprecedented times. What do you do with that? If your business was evacuated and you're unable to move or migrate things in a quick fashion, what do you do? So you got natural disaster, network failure, cyber attacks, all of those things. So do you assess the risks and prioritize those resources? So again, as much as you want to have business contingency and continuity, sometimes you got to weigh the cost with what you can get for your business. But having an incident response plan, what is it we're going to do if we have to evacuate due to a natural disaster and we only have a few hours? What is it we can do? Do we have an offsite backup of our business applications? Do we have the ability to contact, our application provider so that they could set something up for us if we need to? All of those pieces should be in play as part of your business contingency planning. So we talk about that contingency. We also need to talk about resilience in times of turmoil. So in the case of incidents or security incidents, what is our resilience? What's our ability to limit that impact? If we can reduce that down to a general few, it typically will go much better. So according to the National Cybersecurity Alliance, 60% of businesses that are hacked go out of business within 6 months. It is something, as we begin to dive into security in the world of SWK, we started thinking about the small business owners that we serve, and it's like, wow, that could be very dangerous to a small business owner. And the vast majority of damage in cyber attacks is, our inability to respond. We don't know what to do. We call up somebody, can you help us? And IT providers are in cover CYA. I'll use that terminology and abbreviation, but they're out there trying to figure out what to do, but at the same time making sure that there's not a finger pointing, and having a good cyber prevention plan prevents that from happening and everybody responding as they should, right? It's less about whose fault it is and more so about how we keep your business running. That's the part of it we have to deal with. So, and the last part is that economic impact, right? So when you ask a customer how long they can be down and they said they can't, there's a financial impact to the business for that time of turmoil or that time of issue that you want to mitigate the best you can. So all things to think about. So backup for disaster recovery situations. So I will tell you the number one thing you can do if you were to walk away from today's webinar with anything but this, having a backup strategy that's not an on-premise, that has multiple redundancies, is the best thing you can do for anybody in your business. So cyber attacks, natural disasters, hardware failure, human error, you know, I tripped over a cord, I unplugged something, all of those factors can weigh into that. So having a great backup strategy is important. And so, and I always like to say multiple backup strategies are important. So in my example there would be, if you're running SQL Server, having a SQL product that backs up SQL Server specifically independent of your backup strategy means you have duality of purpose. So, you know, if there's a point failure on one strategy, there's a secondary on another at a very low cost point. So those are things we definitely can help you with on lesson learned from us as an organization, because we've also applied some of those strategies as well at SWK and taken them to a lot of our clients. So definitely have that strategy in place. So remote working risks. So I thought about this, the weakest link and the risks you know and you don't know, right? So so there's clever activities of hacking that are going on, but the number one we hear about all the time, whether it's in the government or on the private sector, is ransomware, right? Ransomware people, they come in, you get that message saying, you know, go ahead and send me $250,000 of Bitcoin to this location and I might unlock you, right? So we've had clients who paid the ransom and didn't get unlocked. We've had clients that paid the ransom and it did get unlocked. It just depends on that attacker, but keep in mind, you're negotiating with a terrorist and they have the upper hand in this situation. So, you know, your hopes are that they unlock your data, but I would tell you what we've seen of the ransomware attacks we've responded to, and there's been a lot of them, 50% have succeeded in having their software unlocked. So that's not very good odds. So many companies think firewalls are good enough, so they just think, hey, you know, our network administrator, they can handle cybersecurity, they understand. I would tell you, if you're an IT professional and you're an IT administrator on a network, having a secondary individual with cybersecurity focus and point information is a great thing, right? So our security operations center, those folks do that every day. They do not handle our network operations center. They are doing purely security, purely endpoint remediation. They're doing nothing else. They become subject matter experts in understanding in the cyber world what's happening, whether it's release of information on the dark web, whether it's information coming directly from a leak inside the company. They're looking for all of those things. So. And then we have our work from home employees. They share their computers with their families. We talked about that earlier. And keep in mind that many insurance policies do not cover work from home computers and devices. So you may think you have cyber protections insurance. Double check your policy to make sure that using personal equipment is covered by that, because if it's not, the potential for you introducing that into the world. And when we do remediation and we do our security threat evaluation and we come in and look at one that's happened, we can tell insurance companies where that cybersecurity threat originated from. And the first question they ask us, was it a personal piece of equipment? So giving you a warning on that side. So They know, and hackers know most home security devices are not secured. So I have my personal network at home. I have it secured by an endpoint protection plan just for me personally. I'll give you an example. I had 782 attempts to come through my firewall. So anytime that exists in a public network, so you're on Comcast, Cable One, any of those companies, their partial parts of their network are publicly exposed and vulnerable. So keep in mind that just because you're working from home doesn't necessarily mean you're low-hanging fruit. So advantages working remotely, and I really felt that there was advantages and challenges, right? So productivity. So there's definitely a high level of productivity. We saw it at SWK as well. We also really began to expand our communication where we thought there was less collaboration, right? So it's hard to get people together than it is in an office, or in my case, I always liked it as the water cooler time. And that made it a little harder. So less control on cybersecurity. There's definitely a reduction in cost because working from home saves the company not having to have the overhead of the office and the things that go around it. And the part of it I think our employees have benefit is they like the flexible hours. So, we've got a timing change. I come on at 6 in the morning because of our East Coast time frame. I get a little bit more flexibility to work some of those hours and change them as I see fit in order to adapt to the organization. So, but the bigger one that we had a challenge with is closing the laptop, I called it. So work-life balance is very hard in the working remotely because we tend to work a little bit more and a little bit longer, and we tend to look at things and respond to them quickly. Or as I like to call it, we have what we call the 9 o'clock response, so the 9 p.m. response. So definitely making sure that you balance that out is important, because as we get later in the evening and we've worked all that time, we become less inclined to review things and can suddenly introduce, a security threat into the situation without knowing it. So those are all things I think that are important in that working remotely, understanding the advantages and those challenges. So how to cyber secure your company? So Jolene talked about, we're offering a $500 security assessment, and this is not just an SWK employee. We employ a cyber threat security analysis company that does our cybersecurity intrusion testing, especially for our endpoint protection customers on a regular basis. And so definitely having that done is important. So even if you don't win, you might come back. We don't mark that up. We actually do it at cost for the customers because we believe it's a critical business function and we want them to be able to have access to it. So we keep that pricing low for us to be able to provide that, and we definitely go through and do that security assessment and security risk. Then we do, they report back a remediation requirement and what they suggest and recommend you do. So inventory what you have and what you need. That's part of it, and the critical functions. Determine how employees will work remotely. Are they using corporate owned devices? Or are they bringing their own device? Should I use VPN versus RDP? Should I incorporate multi-factor authentication or 2FA, as you commonly hear it called? How should that be applied? So those are all things to determine in that working remotely piece, and determine what investments are needed. So I would encourage you to think about, as you enter into this new work from home environment, and if it continues, in some cases companies are moving into a higher level of permanency in that environment, do you determine to drop in your own firewall technology that allows you to securely make sure that you monitor that location? Do you have better productivity software to monitor what's going on in that bring your own device environment or the corporate owned environment? So and this is a bit, the big one, make a plan. It doesn't have to be all at once. It can start out in small, digestible pieces for your organization, so that you can ramp up to get where you need. So you don't need to buy the whole giant package at one time. So I talked about multi-factor authentication. We have a product called Know Before You Go. It talks about security awareness. I think that's a great tool to make sure that employees become more proficient and understanding what's going on. We do a lot of dark web monitoring, security event management, and the biggest one is your backup and continuity. So you're going to hear me say it almost every other slide: backup, backup, backup. And then when you thought you had a backup, make sure you back up again. So it's important, I think. So multi-factor authentication, and you see it going on. I would say, if I could see a raise of hands and I asked you how many log into your bank, and they're using a 2FA technology to do authentication for certain factors, it's become the standard in there, and that is, are you doing this? And if you are, tell me you're doing it. And so there's different methods to do that, right? So there's access codes, texting, smart devices, all of these different ways to manage that. But if you haven't looked into multi-factor authentication, you definitely should. It is one step closer to preventing access to an environment that potentially could introduce a variable you don't want to have. In case in point, if you go back and find how many network passwords are easily decrypted or easily found out, when you begin to expose your RDP or other connected services out to the external internet, having that will definitely add an inexpensive protective layer. At SWK, we use a product called Duo, but there's several of them out there, and Google Authenticator and everything else. So finding what works best for your organization and adapts to your applications is always a plus. I will tell you, you can use any NMFA product almost with remote desktop services and incorporate it immediately into that technology with little or no help. So it's definitely something to look at. Security awareness training, we talked about, know before you go, but having that ability to analyze and train and go back, because what they do is they're phishing. They're sending out something to see how people react to it and what they do. And so you're looking for those potential data breaches. And when I said at the beginning, employees are one of your #1 spots for data breach. So training them and understanding how sophisticated attacks happen is important. So, products like Know Before You Go will help you in setting up that training assessment and being able to help you analyze that as well. So definitely think about that, because accounting folks, we tend to be the people who share readily information that we probably shouldn't share. And when I say that, is more so the security within the environment. So you'll go ahead and log in as me. Right? So those are things that we should think about in that awareness. So dark web monitoring, you hear this quite a bit in the world of dark web, and they didn't get into your system. They didn't ransomware the system. What they did is they got information. They got user lists, social security numbers, and those things. And so a lot of the cybersecurity products and endpoint protection in our security operations centers, they monitor the dark web. So to make sure that they can mitigate a potential threat, if there's been an email or password stolen from your network, they can quickly come back and say, hey, BJ, somebody got a hold of what could be your password, you need to change it. So. And then the vulnerability testing, we talked about that, just making sure that you effectively test to see where the potential vulnerable pieces are in your organization. So I'm, again, big fan of it. You know, doing it once or twice a year at $500 a piece is not too costly for most organizations, and you get a wealth of information on that to mitigate it. So again, advanced endpoint protection, reiterating with that, you know, distributed remote workforce employing from home, it's probably the biggest piece you'll see we talk about quite a bit, you know, because it's about detecting, responding, recovering, identifying, and you're seeing a lot of those companies definitely come into their own related to it. And when I talk about endpoint protection, it's definitely a more reasonable solution for small businesses. It's not as expensive as maybe a cybersecurity solution. So Secure Cloud has a full cybersecurity solution that's at a different level, and sometimes that type of product might not be economically feasible for you, where I believe endpoint protection more fits the needs of our Sage 100 community. So a lot of it's analysis and data, right? So telling you what's going on and what's active. So, you know, that's an event manager, and most endpoint protections have that. They're able to monitor that and give you that information. And then backup and continuity, traditional backup. We talk about, you know, that contingency planning. And again, I said backup. So high availability. So in the world of business continuity or business backup, you can have a backup product that backs up your data and stores that in a way to recover it. You can have a backup solution that stores your data in the cloud so that it's off premise. And you have backup solutions that can store that with business continuity, meaning I could take your servers and spin them up in the cloud somewhere and allow you to continue to operate. So there's multiple layers in that world of business and business continuity. It is the most reasonable and least expensive part of cyber protecting your environment in the Sage 100 world. So definitely explore that. Happy to answer questions after this if you want to shoot them over related to some of the products that we use within our industry or within SWK as well. So we talked a little bit about the Security Operations Center. This is one of our Security Operations Center. They're monitoring all of those organizations, responding, and in some cases, they're responding to things and the user doesn't even know it. So, you know, they were definitely traditionally an enterprise level thing when they came out, but now they've definitely come down into the SMB market, so small businesses can take advantage of that through endpoint protection. So we bundle endpoint protection with the Security Operations Center, so it's bundled into a very reasonable per device fee, so that you get that advantage where before you would have had to potentially bought, you know, into the tens of thousands of dollars in order to have that particular product. Now you can get into it for in the terms of hundreds of dollars and low thousands of dollars. So definitely affordable for you. So, as I have kept on talking and going here, we talked about, so we have Secure Cloud Hostings by SWK. So SCH was developed from the ground up. It has, it was designed on the Microsoft architecture because it had to cater to the world of Sage 100 and its many nuances. We added a wonderful cybersecurity layer to that, much more sophisticated than an endpoint protection, as it's monitored 24/7 by that Security Operations Center, because there are definitely nuances in the Sage 100 world. And then it allowed you to share your data. So we became device agnostic in order to deploy this product. I looked for a while on products that would work well with Sage 100, and you know, after you know, a 60%, this worked, and I finally got us up to about 85 to 90% on being able to work in the Sage 100 world effectively without a bunch of issues. So it's definitely an offering from us for you to think about, and it definitely has been designed from the ground up for Sage 100, by the way. So I wanted to talk about a customer hacking encounter, and it was funny as I was talking to this customer, and he goes, I'd like you to change my name to protect the innocent or the guilty. And so I'll call it Customer Alpha. They had 10 Sage 100 employees. They were running Sage 100 on a 2012 R2 server, so current technology, nothing out of the ordinary. However, it had gone unpatched for 4 months because the internal IT guy was a little nervous about affecting 100 by patching it with something that might change it. And then the backup systems, he thought that accounting was checking their backups, and accounting thought he was checking the backups. And there was issues with security not being set on all the directories correctly. So the hacker sent an email to one of the Sage 100 employees who happened to be on their personal machine, RDP in, and it transferred over, a piece of ransomware transferred over in their RDP clipboard, and it was connected to the network. And for most of you that might have not experienced ransomware, the ransomware people have gotten much more sophisticated in the sense they know that we don't work Saturdays and Sundays in most cases. So they have it time synced for the ransomware to execute on a Saturday. Thus, endpoint protections and cybersecurity products can actually see it before it completely executes if something's looking for it. So it took over on Saturday, they came in Monday, and they had no backup for 6 months, and we had the word help. So that we wound up actually moving that client into secure cloud as a business continuity. We restored their 6 months. They paid the ransomware, but they wound up not getting their data back. So we helped rebuild it. We did some things to help get them where we need. Lo and behold, one of the accounting employees had backed up the Mass 90 directory thinking we were going to be doing an upgrade, and so we went from 6 months down to only losing 3 weeks. So it was a lot better for them, but in the end result was expensive and time consuming. So definitely, it happens. In the last 60 days, we've had 7 customers come to us with ransomware on their Sage 100. So, in varying degrees. So it definitely, we're seeing it more and more prevalent in the last few months as people are working from home. So keep that in mind, not trying to scare you, but I definitely wanted to, this was a customer who said they weren't a target. They shouldn't have affected them. But again, it's an opportunistic attack, not one intentional. So we created SWK Managed Cloud Services, and this is just a plug for that. So we're doing cybersecurity, we're doing cloud MSP. We definitely will help you with business continuity and cybersecurity. And you heard me talking about, we're also doing hybrids where we're doing infrastructure as a service. So, part of you can be on premise, part of you can be in the cloud. So that we have the ability to cater to a hybrid environment to help you manage that any step of the way. So definitely willing to talk with you if you want to, and there's an interest, reach out to your customer account manager and they'll definitely put us together. So Q&A, you like to learn more about cybersecurity, you're interested, reach out, you're interested in network vulnerability. If you'd like to learn more about our managed cloud services, we're definitely there to help you. And the last one there is important. If you want to reach out and you just want to learn from me, I'm not trying to just completely sell you something, but if you just want to do that, definitely reach out on the poll, and we'll definitely get back to you. So I want to talk to you about what's going on. So that's important. With that said, I have used my entire hour. That was a lot of talking for me. I'm going to give it back to you, Jolene.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you, DJ. We'll now open it up for questions. If you have any questions, please enter them into the questions section of your GoToWebinar. And while we're waiting for those to come through, please answer the poll question. Just a reminder, by requesting follow-up information or a network vulnerability test during our poll question, you will be entered into a raffle for a free network assessment valued at $500. Winners will be drawn and notified after the presentation. And BJ, we do have a few questions that have come through. The first being, why would I select hosting with you over Amazon and Azure?
So that's a good question. So hosting with us is a completely managed service. So we, unlike Amazon or Azure, where you're buying raw infrastructure, either your internal IT folks or another MSP is going to have to help you manage that. So Amazon or Azure do not do any kind of management of it. They just give you that server and say, here, use it for whatever you want to use it. So we're definitely going to manage front end to back end security operations, cybersecurity, your antivirus, your backups are all managed by our network operations center. So big difference between us and Amazon and Azure in the sense that we're a fully managed out product.
Perfect. We have another. If my IT provider provides hosting, is that the same thing that you provide?
So if your IT provider is providing hosting, when I talk about secure cloud services, we did build it from the ground up to house Sage 100. So it very well could be similar or same. I would tell you that we definitely take the approach with Sage 100 on our hosting service to be much more in tune with it. And so that's the big question. If I was to ask your IT provider, ask them what other application experience in hosting have they had and see if it's same or similar to Sage 100.
And we have another. I have my own internal IT people. How would this work with them?
That's a great question. So internal IT folks, what we're seeing more and more is this term infrastructure as a service, and so they're wanting to offload certain things to somebody that has a little bit better expertise. In case in point, Sage 100, I have more IT folks go, yeah, can you just take this? I don't want to deal with it because of the nuances, the security risks, some of the other things that go with it. So we definitely can. You can usually do a hybrid in infrastructure as a service where you work collectively to offer that ability for the internal IT folks to manage the vast majority of their infrastructure, and then offloading some of that infrastructure that they believe they don't want to deal with. So and that does happen quite a bit. So we would consider that versus the secure cloud hosting. You'd have an infrastructure as a service would be the terminology we would use there for a hybrid situation with your internal IT folks.
Wonderful. And we have one more. I entered late, so forgive me if this was discussed, but if we host Sage remotely with you versus on our server, would the program be accessible on any computer, or do we still use the installed program on our computer?
So we use a product called Parallels RAS, Remote Access Services. You talked earlier about selecting selecting something that worked well with Sage 100. It does come with a universal client, so it can work on an iPad, iOS, Android, and Google Chromebook. It can work on PCs and it can work on Macs. What I would tell you, though, to clarify, is that our experience on the Mac platform is Sage 100 is not a Mac application. So in the cases where you have certain functions, they are going to operate differently and not operate entirely the same. So the experience on a PC running the Parallels product is going to be slightly different than running it on a Mac. Not that it won't run, it just may have some nuances. So the answer is yes, we can use it on any platform you like. Based on that Parallels, the experience may be slightly different between platforms.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, BJ, for your informative presentation and for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a wonderful rest of your day.